Form over function. This is an argument that we hear a lot, especially when in reference to B-segment SUVs. The reality is that a lot of buyers within this segment are looking for a car that will make them look like they have an active lifestyle, despite them not actually having an active lifestyle. The Subaru XV is different though. It's not function over form, because it's certainly a decent looking car, but it offers a very different take on what a B-segment SUV should be. It can actually get you the adventures that you're looking for. All-wheel drive? Got that. Advanced driver assist features? Got that too. A reliable powertrain that will never let you down? Yep, that's 3 for 3. So why aren't these things more popular? My name is ABDULLAH. This is Malaysian Motoring. This is our review of the 2022 Subaru XV with EyeSight. Now for the 2022 model year, the Subaru XV has received lots of small updates. So for starters, I would like to clarify this is a GT model, so there is a little extra body kit and all that. We'll cover that in a second. But you do get a new front bumper with a new Subaru grille. If you can't tell the difference, that's fine because it took me a while too. You still get full LED bi-beam LED headlights up here with daytime running lights and halogen fog lights down below. These headlights are also the type that follows the direction of the car, so they swivel to follow the direction of the steering wheel, ensuring that you have better visibility as you go through corners. Now down the side you get 17-inch alloy wheels as standard, although the GT and the 2.0 IP models get different designs. You do get very prominent body cladding. Now this is something the XV's always had, and I have to say that I feel that it's aged very well with this car. It doesn't look outdated, and it certainly looks less offensive than when it first came about. Now down the side you get functional roof rails as standard. This side skirt is part of that body kit that I mentioned earlier. You do get silver coloured door handles, which I must admit are a bit weird. They work very well with this colour scheme, but you normally see chrome here, so it's a bit weird that there's no chrome. Now at the back you still get LED combination tail lights with the fog lights down there, a bit more of that black cladding, again to make the car look a little bit more rugged. You also get a roof spoiler. Now the thing about the Subaru XV is practicality has never really been its strongest suit. Because of that all-wheel drive system, it means that the boot space is not as cavernous as some of its competitors. As you can see, the boot floor in this car is quite high, and the load height is also very high as well. So that means if you have any items on the ground, it's going to be quite a difficult task of loading them in, and then once they're in, they can't be that tall. If I pull the tonneau cover, you'll see that there isn't really that much space in here. And also, it's not like there's any more space hiding underneath the boot floor, because down here, if I pull up these tethers, you'll see that there is a space saver spare wheel, and then the boot floor itself is actually not very deep, again to make way for that all-wheel drive system. The other thing is that this tonneau cover cannot be kept underneath the boot floor, which means if you want it out, it's out. You have to commit to that decision. However, in terms of overall boot space, I think that most people will actually be okay with this. I think very few B-segment SUV buyers ever fully utilize the amount of cargo room in their cars, and ultimately if you're taking a trip to that Swedish furniture store, you can fold down the rear seats 60/40, where you have an almost flat load bay with a little bit of a lip that goes down, so loading stuff from the back shouldn't be very difficult at all. And again, you're paying for that all-wheel drive system, which we'll talk about a little bit more in the driving portion. But for now, let's talk about the interior and see what changes have been made there. Now inside the Subaru XV, very few changes have been made. For starters, you now get an electronic parking brake with auto vehicle hold, which is basically when you stop at a traffic light, the car will hold itself for you. And that's about it. The thing is, the interior of the Subaru XV does look a little bit dated. There are cars like the Mazda CX-3, for example, which have a bit more flash to them. But the thing about the XV is, while it doesn't have a lot of showroom appeal, it will appeal to you over time, which means a lot of buyers or potential buyers lose out on that when they're looking at the cars in the showroom. Because the fact of the matter is, this interior is built very, very well. You get lots of nice material, you get contrast stitching on the dash, on the steering wheel, you get this carbon fiber effect on the doors, and for these seats, In the GT, they come with leather, and you get white contrast stitching here, a bit of grey, a bit of orange, you get some perforations, and so the interior, the tactility in here is really good. The other thing is, in terms, like I said, of build quality, everything in here is engineered to feel very good. All these knobs, all the switch gear, everything in this car feels very satisfying to use, and the same goes to all of the electronics in here. So you have a large touchscreen in the middle, which is capacitive touch. It's very clear and very bright, and it falls directly where your hand would be if you were sat to drive. It also helps that you have a lot of tactile buttons here. So you have a knob here to change tracks, you have a knob here for your volume, you have an apps button which basically brings you to your Apple CarPlay or Android Auto, home, back and voice control. And these buttons are very big, which means even for passengers or the driver, it's very easy to access all of these things. There are even more buttons on the steering wheel, however, because you have buttons on one side to handle most of your multimedia stuff. You have an info button here which controls the supervision cluster up there, and then on this side you have your adaptive cruise control, ADAS features buttons here. You have your call, pickup and end call here, you have SI mode here, and then you have more buttons here to control the center information screen. Now, of course, for a lot of people, they'll be going, why are there so many buttons? But the fact of the matter is, buttons means that it's easy for you to get used to things. So initially when you sit down, yes, you'll go, oh, there's so many things for me to touch, but then after a couple of days, you'll realize, oh, I need to change that screen, and you just instinctively reach down and play with the buttons down here, or you need to change that screen, and you know exactly where it is. All the buttons fall very easily to hand. The other thing is actually the trip reset button, which is its own separate button up here on the dash. Now, I bring that up because as a motoring journalist, we have to reset trips a lot. And on some cars where the screens are very big and the buttons are very few, it can be very confusing to figure out where that is. Whereas with this car, it was like second nature. You know exactly where it is and you know how easy it is to manipulate. There are even more buttons over here, however, for things like your illumination levels and your swiveling headlights. You want to turn that off, but there's no real need to do that. There are more buttons, unfortunately, up here on the ceiling because this controls the EyeSight ADAS system. So you have your lane keep assist button here and your pre-collision warning, pre-collision braking buttons up here, although you shouldn't really be touching those, so the fact they're up there doesn't really matter. Now, in terms of interior features, this car does come with dual zone climate control. You get an electric driver's seat with two-stage memory function, which also control the mirrors. So husband and wife, for example, could set up their seats and mirrors separately, and it'll be very easy for you to set up. Driving position also is fantastic because this steering wheel is reach and rake adjustable, which means you can get your ultimate or ideal driving position very easily, and you have lots of space to put stuff. You've got big door bins, you've got a couple of cup holders here, you even got a little card holder here, which is very easy for you to just slot things in. You've got a relatively large armrest storage cubby with a couple of USB ports. You also get a cubby here which comes with a USB for your phone. Unfortunately, this cubby is not quite big enough for modern phones, so it doesn't quite fit nicely in there, at least without sort of bothering your cable, so that's a little bit of a downside, but it's a small matter to have to get used to. And honestly, everything in here is just very nice. If there is one thing that I'd like to complain about, it's the fact that there isn't a dimming rear view mirror. Now, I know it seems like a tiny little thing, but because an auto dimming rear view mirror is becoming such a common item in cars nowadays, when it's not there, it becomes very, very obvious. When you're driving at night, you still have to adjust this thing to get rid of glare. So it's a little bit of a distraction. But aside from that, there's not really much to complain about in here. And it's much the same way with the way this car drives. And so why don't we get to that now? Now, driving the Subaru XV. Now, it's really interesting because the XV is, as I said earlier in this video, one of my most favorite, if not my most favorite B-segment crossover slash SUV. The reason being because as SUVs have progressed from its initial days, like the Range Rover, the initial Land Rover Range Rover and so on, it's gone from being utilitarian to being more posh and being more about style rather than substance. Vehicles like the Honda HR-V, for example, and the Hyundai Kona are about style and about making it look like you enjoy an active lifestyle without actually really giving you any more capability than a hatchback. But the Subaru XV is different. For starters, as standard, it comes with Symmetrical All-Wheel Drive, one of Subaru's sort of pillar products. And as a result, it means that just out of the box, this offers a lot more capability both on and off-road. This is of course underlined by the fact that the Subaru XV facelift now comes with a dual mode X mode selection button, which sort of optimizes the all-wheel drive system to ensure that you have maximum traction and capability no matter what the situation. And then paired to that symmetrical all-wheel drive system is this incredible boxer engine, which is very, very smooth and very quiet in operation. And as a result, it means that you have very smooth progress no matter what. You can enjoy a great amount of linear power in this car as a result of this engine combination. Because it's also naturally aspirated, which admittedly does detract a little bit from the overall driving experience, but I'll get to that in a moment. Despite being naturally aspirated, or rather because it's naturally aspirated, it means that the torque is spread very linearly across the rev range, which means that you can enjoy a decent amount of torque no matter where you are, rather than having it peak very early on and then you're sort of stuck with it. This is very important, of course, when you're off-roading, because you would want to have a better torque spread for the car to manipulate the traction, to be able to send that traction and that power to the wheels in order to get you out of a sticky situation. Then there is of course the fact that the Subaru XV is an incredibly refined machine. So for starters, in terms of tactility, almost everything in this car, at least above sort of hip height, is soft touch, including, for example, up here on the doors, the dash. Everything is very, very well screwed together and it feels very plush. All the buttons and switchgear feel very tactile. It's only sort of down here on the door card does it start to get a little bit scratchy, and even then the scratchiness of this material is not nearly as bad as some other competition within this segment. And on top of that, you pair that to the fact that, as I said earlier, this powertrain is very refined and very quiet. The Lineartronic CVT automatic does a very good job at ensuring that you have the right engine speed without sort of excessive vibration, excessive noise coming into the cabin. But also, it's the fact this car is incredibly well insulated. You get very little wind noise, if at all, despite the fact that you have very large wing mirrors mounted on the doors. You also get only a little bit of road roll. Compare this to vehicles like the Renault Captur, for example. This car is positively church-like in its silence. And of course, the fact this cabin is so quiet means that if you'd want to use this as a family cruiser, for example, to ferry children or members of your family, they'll be very comfortable in here. That is, again, further aided by the fact that this car rides incredibly well. Compare this to vehicles like, say, the Mazda CX-3, and you'll realize that the Subaru XV is a lot more plush, a lot softer, a lot more pliant compared to its other brethren. And as a result, it makes this a very, very competent family cruiser, which is especially noteworthy in the B segment space, where you get vehicles like the Proton X50, for example, that try to be a lot more dynamic and compromise a little bit in terms of overall comfort. Now, when you put all of that together, it makes the Subaru XV a very compelling package. Then, of course, you get to this car's active safety features. With a facelift, the Subaru XV now comes as standard with EyeSight, which is Subaru speak for its advanced driver assist features. Now, before I go any further, I'd like to mention that it's not actually full level 2 semi-autonomous, because this car lacks active lane keep assist as well as blind spot monitoring and rear cross traffic alert. And as a result, it means that the car can't quite drive itself, even at low speeds or town speeds or traffic jam speeds for that matter, or help assist in taking away some of that burden when you're driving out on the motorway. It does, however, come with active cruise control. Yes, that's the one. Replete with low speed follow, which means that when you're in a traffic jam, the XV can do the acceleration and braking for you. Now, I'm not sure where the limit of it is in terms of its top speed, but as far as I could tell, it was very, very effective up to the motorway speed. And on top of that, EyeSight has a very unique feature which I've never seen in any other car before, where you can actually set the severity of acceleration, as it were, for the EyeSight system. So you can choose between eco, comfort, dynamic and sport. No, sorry, eco, comfort, normal and dynamic, which means if you want a very aggressive adaptive cruise control system, you can have that. Or if you're like me and you find that adaptive cruise control systems tend to be way too aggressive than need be, you can actually put it on eco or comfort for that matter, and it ensures very, very smooth progress. On top of that, EyeSight is also incredibly good at decelerating the car. It can detect an obstacle from a very, very far way off, and so it brings the car very gradually to a halt, which is very, very impressive. What's also very, very impressive is the fact that the Subaru XV comes as standard with an electronic parking brake, which, as I now come to a red light, will prove to be very useful, because now I can just sort of stop the car and the car holds itself. And that's very, very helpful. I've always loved this feature, and I love the fact that, of course, it's freed up space in the center console for other things like a cubby hole and some cup holders. But of course, as you're going through this, if you've actually survived this long into the video, which I know many of you haven't, you may be wondering, well, does it make the XV perfect? Well, not quite. For starters, as I said earlier, this is a naturally aspirated 2-litre boxer engine, which means you lack the sort of low-end grunt that you get from turbocharged motors. Vehicles like the Proton X50, for example, or the hybrid Honda HR-V, for example, would feel a little bit more rapid. And then, of course, there is the fact that other naturally aspirated competitors like the Mazda CX-30, for example, have a slightly brawnier engine, which means that it makes you feel like the car is more rapid than it is. Not to say that this car is down on power. I took this car up a very steep hill over a very long route. I won't say which hill or which route, but I can tell you that it did that without issue at all. The car didn't even complain, despite the fact with me arriving there thinking that maybe this engine might run out of puff. It certainly did not. Then there is the biggest issue, or rather the smallest issue, which is the boot, because the boot space in this car is noticeably smaller than its rivals. That is, of course, owing to the fact that this car comes with all-wheel drive, which means that the boot floor has to be significantly higher in order to make room for the rear differential and all the usual mechanical gubbins that come with all-wheel drive. Now, that does mean that if you're looking at these cars on paper, you look at the Honda HR-V and go, wow, that's huge. And then you look at other cars like the Renault Captur and go, wow, that's huge. And then you look at the XV and kind of go, But in reality, I find that the space in the XV is adequate. You can put 3 or 4 cabin-sized bags in there, or 2 cabin bags and 2 soft bags. And that's plenty enough for a family of 4, for a weekend or a week for that matter, unless of course you have babies and then you need a lot more space. You should be able to fit a pram in there and some luggage bags still, which means that it's not all bad news. But I suspect that for those who use their B-segment SUVs to really haul things, not that anybody actually does that, but if you really need practicality on your side and you really put a lot of emphasis on cargo room, then perhaps the Subaru XV might disappoint in that regard. But I've done about 1,000 kilometers in the Subaru XV since I collected it, and for what it's worth, this car has not yet disappointed. Would I prefer a turbocharged engine? Sure, but at what cost? You'll probably take more fuel. This car's fuel economy has been incredibly frugal. Despite everything we've thrown at it, over 1,000 kilometers, it's done about 8.5 liters per 100 kilometers, which is very commendable for what is ultimately a naturally aspirated all-wheel drive engine, or powertrain rather. So as I said, would I like a turbocharged engine? Sure, but I don't need it. Would I like a bit more boot space? Sure, but I never need it. Would I like a powered passenger seat? Yeah, definitely. I definitely like one of those. But the fact of the matter is, everything in here is about what you need rather than what you want. Trust me, once you've gotten used to having all-wheel drive all the time, like you get only in a Subaru, it just makes sense. This is something that you need in your life. You will love the fact that the all-wheel drive system makes you feel a lot more confident, especially in our very treacherous weather at times. The fact that you have EyeSight also means that you have an extra pair of eyes, quite literally looking out for you and making sure that you are kept out of harm's way. This is an excellent car. It has everything that you need. And as a result, it makes it very easy for me to recommend. But again, you have to ask, what are your priorities? If you travel a lot of long distances and you would appreciate the adaptive cruise control and the comfort and security that comes with knowing that you have symmetrical all-wheel drive, then this is definitely a car that I could recommend. However, if you want, for example, the most affordable way to get into a snazzy looking B-segment SUV, then perhaps the Proton X50 is more for you. If practicality is your bag, then of course you would prefer the Honda HR-V. That is, however, sort of the last thing I'd like to mention before we cut to the outro, which is the price. The Subaru XV starts at a little over 130 grand, or rather just under 140 grand. And for the GT edition that we're driving here, it is a little bit more expensive. Now that does mean that it is significantly more expensive than the current B-segment leader, the Proton X50. But it's sort of within the rough ballpark of everyone else. And so it does mean that the Subaru XV doesn't really pose that much of a price premium. In terms of after sales and reliability, Subarus have always been relatively bulletproof, and Subaru does maintain a decent dealer network here in Malaysia, especially if you live in the Klang Valley, which means that if you are an urbanite using this as your urban runaround, you shouldn't have too many issues. So, the Subaru XV, is it a good car? Yes. Is it a great car? Not quite. The thing is, if you have an active lifestyle, you want a car that can follow you on your adventures, and you will certainly appreciate the rugged dependability of the Subaru XV. If practicality is more your bag, you might be better served with a Honda HR-V. If driving is your ultimate thing, then perhaps a Mazda CX-3. And if budget is a concern, then look no further than the Proton X50. But if you want one of the only contenders in the segment to offer all-wheel drive, if you want, again, rugged dependability, a car that is as adventurous as you, then this is the one I'd recommend. In any case, that's been our review of the new 2022 Subaru XV with EyeSight. If you enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, hit the little bell icon so you're notified every time we make a new upload. Don't forget to follow us on Facebook, Twitter and Instagram. All the links are in the description below. Thank you so much for watching. We'll catch you in the next one. Take care, stay safe, Happy New Year!